Thank you for joining us at the 2022 edition of Expo Chicago, the International Exposition of Contemporary and Modern Art. I'm Kate Sears-Patowski, Director of Programming, and it is my great pleasure to welcome you to the Dialogue stage, presented in partnership with the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. Dialogues offers panel discussions, conversations, and provocative artistic discourse with leading artists, curators, designers, and arts professionals on current issues that engage them. This year's Dialogues program is kicked off right now with a conversation between abstract painter and social activist Mary Lovelace O'Neal, who just celebrated her 80th birthday. A vital force since the 1970s, Mary is known for her paintings that pair bold, monumental scale with layers of unexpected materials to explore deep personal narratives and mythologies, as well as broader themes of racism, social justice, and the environment. We are also thrilled to welcome the Museum of Contemporary Art Chicago's Manilow Senior Curator, Jamillah James. Previously the Senior Curator at the Institute of Contemporary Art Los Angeles and co-curator of the 2021 New Museum Triennial, she will be in discussion with Mary about her more than 6-decade-long painting practice, works in arts education, and social activism. Please join me in welcoming both of our panelists.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Kate. Thank you, Expo. And thank you, everyone. I am beyond thrilled to be on stage with Mary Lovelace O'Neal, who's really just a titan of painting internationally, and especially in this country, with the rich histories that she evokes in her work, her steadfast commitment to her practice, and also just being a legend, an absolute legend, which I said to you yesterday when we spent time together. So we're going to get into it. We're going to get into some serious conversation today about your work and about your history. So I want to start off with going to the beginning. So you were born in Jackson, Mississippi, which is one of our great American cities. Your family, yes, Jackson, Mississippi. Your family moved around because your father was a music professor at Arkansas State and also at Tougaloo College in Mississippi. Coming from a creative background, did you ever think about music, which is what your father's discipline was, as a path in the world?
I don't sing. I fake it a little bit, but music just wasn't it for me. I think I needed, it's like musicians are a little crazy, it's all in their heads, all of it, I should say, even if you're a composer and you're writing it and it looks beautiful on those manuscripts, and so, was that what they call all the...
I think the scripts, yeah.
Yeah.
Sheet music.
Yeah. So it never... our house was always full of music, He used to wake us up with drums and, a whole house of something screaming music like, get up, get up, get up.
So then you, with your father working at Tougaloo, you encountered a German painter, Roland Schnell, who encouraged you to explore painting, which you hadn't done at that point. And you and him had a lot of conversations about color and expression. And what was it like to begin to work as a painter?
Well, I did paint and draw and so on as a child. And a part of what that painting and drawing was about was a kind of experience for me, but it was also a way of having us be calm. We would take trains out of the South the minute school was out, because there was always that excess amount of time when you could go down to the river or go into the stores in the downtown of Pine Bluff or of Jackson and, drink out of the white faucet and all kinds of mischief, really resistance, because we were old enough to know that this whole system needed to be resisted. So we would have compartments leaving the South on those trains, and he would crate up our bicycles, skates, everything we owned, dresses, trousers, whatever. And then coloring books and paints and paste and stuff, just so that we could be kept quiet until we got across the Mason-Dixon line. And at that point, everything opened up. Many of you are too young to remember this, and others of you just have no idea probably what I'm talking about, not even as a memory, but I can't do all of that. So I'm saying the boys, my two brothers, never particularly took to the coloring books and so on, but everyone had coloring books and the crayons and so on. So I think that impulse was always there. I'm also dyslexic, and I think children who have what could be in those days determined not a disability but stupidity, So you have other ways of understanding, and you have to take the information that's out there and run it through your own systems, and it may take a little more time. So being able to work that way was very direct for me. It was very direct communication with myself and with others. I'm Southern, so there's a story about everything is Monday, so I have a story. So you have to cut me off to get through whatever. I don't even remember the question.
No, we're here to hear those stories, Mary.
Okay.
So your father also took you to Chicago. He took you here quite a bit as a child. So what were you doing when you were coming up here?
Well, Christmas was a big deal. We would come up in the summers, and we would stay with various families. On my mother's side, the Reddicks, who lived in Gary and Chicago, and the Lovelaces, who lived in Gary and Chicago, and in Milwaukee. And we had an aunt and uncle. My aunt hated us because she had all of these little things, and we thought they were rich because they could make malted milks at home, and we just ran through her place. It was like he in fact was had a church called just Mount Zion in Milwaukee, and it was the biggest black Baptist church in the state of Wisconsin. So we'd go there and run through the partridge. What is it called? The where the preachers live.
Printer's Row?
The parsonage.
Okay.
Yeah. And so she was always relieved when we left. She was so happy. So what was the question?
Yeah, it was about Chicago, your relationship to the city.
Yeah. Marshall Fields and what was the other one? The competition? Carson's. And so that was a big deal at Christmas time, to go and see those windows, and also go to the fields and go to the Art Institute. And I think, just some of those things, my brothers could care less. They really didn't give a fuck about it. They just, let's go get the malts you promised us in Walgreens at the counter. And there were these wonderful little sandwiches. I thought the sandwiches were hip too, but I really enjoyed the whole of it, the visual of it, and I can still see it in many ways.
So ultimately, you enrolled in a BFA program at Howard University. And at that time, you were looking at the New York School of Painters, so Mark Rothko, Franz Kline, William de Kooning. But there are also other groups that were forming around that time, like Spiral in New York with Alma Thomas and Romare Bearden, and also a little bit later, the Washington Color School, so right. Alma Thomas, Sam Gilliam, Kenneth Nolan, and Morris Lewis.
Right.
And this was a really incredible time to enter into an art program and to become a painter, because there were so many incredible artists that were working at the time that one could look to. You did encounter some resistance when you entered into Howard. You studied with David Driscoll, but also worked with Louise Manilow Jones and James Porter. because you were really heavily involved in the civil rights movement at the time and the student nonviolent movement. So how did you balance, this impulse to be a painter and working very rigorously on your artistic practice, but also wanting to be active in the movements at the time?
It was actually a pretty schizophrenic existence, actually, because on the one hand, I had a kind of profile where I had been on the court of one of the frats and had great friends and, all the parents who had sent us there to marry doctors. I somehow didn't get the memo. So, and I was making decisions that particular fraternity was unhappy about, and they didn't want me on the court. The next year, it had been rumored that I would be the queen of the court, and I was a dark-skinned black woman, so that was going to be, quite something. But I started to wear my hair natural, so that was like, nobody could take that. It was like,
It was too much.
that's too much. That's a river too, what is it, a bridge too far. So, I guess most of that time I had this kind of life of duality. Stokely and I were boyfriend and girlfriend,
Stokely Carmichael.
And he was brilliant, really, and had studied with Toni Morrison, that whole cast of important philosophers and artists and, writers. But he came into Driscoll's seminar with me. And so there was kind of a crossover from the movement types to the art types. And somehow I ended up being able to have both of those groups as, friends and comrades and what have you. And it wasn't until I was actually out of graduate school that I understood that I had been making decisions all along about kind of the way or the thing that would be my practice. And so, I like going to parties. I would often rather buy a pot of cadmium red, so that went that sweater, Or so just little things that you decide to do help you make those choices. They become who you become, or you become who they make a way for.
Did you find support amongst your student activist peers for the painting work that you were doing at the time?
Yeah, because so much of it was just class. And you went to class with people from all sides of the campus. I mean, there were those divisions, the sororities and fraternities, and one sorority didn't want you to go out with guys from this frat or that frat, and so I was like, well, I don't want to be in your sorority if I can't go out with all of them. So, that made sense to me, So that's the way So I was living a duality, but it was more, I think, a conception by those outside of me.
Sure.
Certain people I knew wanted me to spend all of my time on picket lines, and making signs and all of those activities. And my parents were supportive of both sides of me, or both things that were pulling me. And I finally determined that I could participate. I mean, I couldn't. Is this making funny noises? Maybe it's too close.
No, I think it's okay.
Okay. I decided that I couldn't do the kind of painting that could be used as propaganda, like the South Americans, like the Cubans and the Chileans, those people who made those fantastic prints, just beautiful, beautiful work. And I couldn't do that. I mean, that was the work that get you to, a picket line or whatever. The only way I could see to deal with that was to put myself on that line, And my painting had information, but it had to be gotten at differently. I wasn't painting black women jumping out of the bush with a gun,
Yeah, instead, you were engaged in abstraction, which at the time was not the program for a lot of black artists. There was this interest and impulse in figuration, representational work, but you were doing something different, exploring the political potential for abstraction. And around 1963, you went to Skowhegan, and I was in my research for this talk. I read there was a quote. I think Jamillah Jones said, She didn't want you to go to Skowhegan and try to start a revolution.
Yeah.
But while you were at Skowhegan, you did start a bit of a revolution in your own practice in that you discovered the lamp black pigment, which would become the hallmark of your early work, the very dense black pigment that you started to explore. So the time at Skowhegan was pretty formative for you.
It was. It was a very, very important experience. I mean, to have nothing to do all day but paint.
Yeah.
Or be involved with art history. It was a job because that was why you were there to do that. And there was little else to do except drink and we ate like pigs, the best food you had, like
Artist
fresh
residencies
milk.
always have really good food. Yeah.
There was lobster, fresh, and everything, and your breakfast. And someone made your bed and did your laundry, and that you were sent there to do one thing, and that was to explore. And it was very painful because, your breakthroughs were rare, and you couldn't. You were sent there to figure out what it is you can do, what you need to do, with your paths. And that's hard work for a youngster, a young person, 18, 19 years old. But it was, it gave me a sense of the ups and downs. And I had a few breakthroughs here and there. In fact, I got, what is it? Mention something?
Mm-hmm.
What do you call that?
Mentored?
No, mention. When
mention.
It's a prize. It's
Oh,
like
sure.
the
Yeah,
second prize.
like a special mention. Yeah.
So I got a prize in sculpture, and I got a second prize in painting too. But the reason I mentioned the sculpture business is that we had an artist come, a sculptor, who I went into that sculpture barn because I just had it with painting. I couldn't stand the smell anymore. I just wanted to be away. And this guy had a big pot brewing with what I came to know later was beeswax and black pigment, dry pigment, and something else was in it. I can't remember another element. And he, as he spoke to us, just started to build things out of paper, from the toilet paper, not toilet paper, but the ones you wipe your hands with.
Paper towels.
Paper towels, and he dropped those papers into this vat of sort of boiling beeswax and
Like almost like encaustic, like beeswax and pigment.
it's like it is like an encaustic, and but he built a little armature of wire and coat hangers and so on, and just started to dress that armature. And I was fascinated by it. I loved the thought of it, and he just nailed things in. I thought, wow, I really like what's going on with that. And I stayed after the lecture was over and after most people had gone. And I was just kind of looking around at what was there. And I said, can I have this stuff? Are you going to use it again? He said, no, I'm not going to use it again. And then he started to question me, like, what are you doing here? Because I was one or two black people there that that summer. So that was a fair question. What are you doing here? But he was very engaging on a one-to-one, and we talked about that material. I didn't think much more about it. I took the pot of stuff, and I built an armature and made a little piece of sculpture, and that got honorable mention. That's what it's called. And as my mother says, it'll come to you. It's true. So that's that. But what was waiting for me to rediscover was that material, that lamp black, which they put into cement when they're building. So it's a very common material, but so a lot of stuff happens. But anyway, I end up at Columbia, and I was forced out of that real fast whipping, de Koonesque kind of way of looking at stuff. Stephen Green, who was my major professor, had taught Stella. That was his claim to fame. And so I immediately hated Stella, and to this day. And so I had to fight with him that whole for weeks and weeks, and then I decided that wasn't a battle I could win. And so what I decided to do was try to calm down my palate and to look for some other ways of approaching stuff. So I just kind of cleared out that whipping, and I was in the paint store, that big one downtown.
Pearl paint.
Pearl.
Yeah.
And I had gotten lots of stuff, charcoal and blah, blah, blah. And I was going down one of those aisles on those wooden floors, and somehow there had been a little hole punched in a bag, and it was dropping out this black stuff, which was just beautiful. It was making this beautiful black pile, and so I thought, I like that. And then I just went down the aisle, and then I came back, and I said, I'm going to buy it, and I packed my cart with a lot of that stuff. And it sat in my studio for weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks, and I never could figure out what to do with it. But my husband, who was John O'Neal at that time, was my stretcher bar builder. And so I had these big stretcher bars of about 7 by 12, which is essentially the stretcher bar or the size of things that I continue to work with. And so I had the black stuff in the corner and these white canvases. That challenge you, that's the biggest challenge, is how to make that first mark on that blank surface. And so I just went into it with charcoals and started drawing figures and still lives and this and that. And I thought, okay, this is where that stuff comes in, because I had been fighting with the black poets because the work wasn't black enough.
Yeah.
And there was that whole issue of flatness that was part of the dialogue at that time. And so I figured, well, I had nailed it with two things, because this black stuff I was rubbing into the canvas. So you couldn't get it any blacker and flatter than that.
Yeah.
So that took care of that dialogue. That was the academic one. And for these black poets who would come to our house and, smoke cigarettes and drink cheap whiskey and so on and scream at me because they could come into my studio and see this. So then I decided to, show them the way of, the way abstraction had played into African and that history in the diaspora, and how it could be as Afrocentric as anything. So that just kind of cooled them out. They couldn't really figure out how to counter that. It was just like, get off my back, let me be.
Yeah, you gave another point of entry into this discussion of blackness.
Yes.
And you're actually giving physical,
Yes.
symbolic, conceptual
Yes.
blackness.
Yes.
Which, the Raymond Saunders text, Black is a Color, came out around 1967.
Yes.
And informed the conversation of the possibilities, the various possibilities of being a Black artist and what Black art could be, and that it didn't have to be either or, it could be both and.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let's move on and talk about your time after Columbia, moving to the Bay, where you remained for many, many years. You became a teacher. You taught at various institutions in the Bay Area, California College of Art, eventually UC Berkeley. Did you always think about being a teacher, or were you a little bit disinterested in the practice of being a teacher?
I never thought about it. I never wanted to teach. But it was a way I figured out that I could support my studio. As I say, I was too old to hoard. That was not an occupation I could be a part of anymore. So I figured, okay, I can teach. I know how to talk about this shit, so I can teach.
Yes.
And so my whole life I've been trying to support a studio. I would not have been in an academic situation for any reason other than I needed to support my studio. I hated school since I was in kindergarten. It was a ruination of my life, kindergarten. And from then on, I hated kindergarten. I hated elementary school. I liked high school a little better because they kind of eased up. And college was better, and graduate school was heaven because they weren't.
You were in New York City and an incredible time.
Yes, and that was an important place to be. Not so much because I was at Columbia, but because of the art scene and the museums and the galleries that taught. Taught you what you wanted to be and taught you what you don't want to be. And so. There, it was out there. Out there was where the dialogue was taking place. Not so much. But people like Stella and Judd, whom I actually loved, came to the department, and so that that kind of almost business reality was brought into those academic settings. So
What were some of the conversations you had with Donald Judd?
I didn't really have as such conversations. They came in and did lectures. I just liked who he was. I liked listening to how he thought about the stuff he was making. And because I felt like Barbara Rose talking about Stella. You look at the Stella, and you read what she said. She's like, "What the fuck is she talking about?" You see that? No, I don't see that. What is that? So that was, I just felt like Judd was a part of what he was making and talking about. And it wasn't so driven by criticism and, that kind of shaping. He was moving out of that. He wasn't letting it. That dialogue was not. His stuff wasn't being driven by theory outside of himself. He was making theories.
Yeah.
And I liked that about it. It didn't mean necessarily I could follow in those steps. People often see the work, especially the Black work, as related to. All of those white guys. And certainly the size brings
the
that.
Scale.
Yeah, the scale does that and so on. But my needs were so different. And they could masquerade because, there was this cottage industry of criticism. So they could make things work and say what they wanted to say about them. And that's almost how I get to be put in that box of abstraction. Mm-hmm. And that's not really where I live. I live in another kind of reality. And so what appears to be abstract is so totally realistic to me is because that's the way I see. It's not so much that I'm following Barnett Newman, because those ideas don't have anything to do with me.
Yeah, you're coming from a very different place.
It was his kind of spirituality, his kind of understanding of himself as a Jew. Trying to understand myself as black and female. And so perhaps in that sense, there's that search going on. But I can see myself being a part of action painting rather than just, sort of crushed into some kind of somebody's idea about what abstraction is.
Yeah, certainly your methods and how you produce your work puts you in that conversation with action painting because your process is very active, even though it's a little out of step chronologically with that movement, with that moment. So when you were in the Bay, what was it like working there? Who were your peers, of the artists that were living and working there at the time? I know that you had correspondence with Robert Colescott, but he was there earlier at Berkeley.
Colescott and I were there one semester at least together, maybe a whole year. I can't remember as guest artist. Colescott, Ray Saunders, Joe Overstreet was there. Joe was my studio mate. I almost killed him, but he was my studio mate. A whole bunch of people. There were a lot of those guys, especially poets too, who were in that scene in San Francisco. And then there was a punk art people and funk art people and all of that. So basically, I had stepped out there on my own and by myself because galleries were not really interested in me, except for Jeremy Stone, who gave me a show after I got back. I think it was 1984, and that work that had moved into stuff that I had seen in Morocco. Mm-hmm. And I came back, and it was actually difficult trying to get all those postcards out of my head. It was so biblical in a way. And in Egypt, I always felt like, well, Jesus Christ is going to come around that corner, because it was that biblical. Yeah. It's just all of the things, if you had grown up in Christianity with all of these pictures of, So she was the only one who really was interested in giving me a show. I had a solo show at the San Francisco Museum, and that was because Rolando Castellón, who was a gallerist, a historian, just this fantastic person, was also a curator during those years. Mm-hmm. He got that show.
And that was in 1979, and you're one of the first black artists to have a solo exhibition at SF MoMA.
Especially women.
And then women artists, at that time. And we're still kind of in this glacial pace of that happening where, Alma Thomas had her first solo show at the Whitney at 72. We have Simone Lee this year representing the U.S. at Venice. Progress is happening, but it's still not quite fast enough. So to be one of the first in 1979 is really a landmark.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah. So in the 1980s, you have your Whales Fucking series, which was the first encounter that I had with your work. And the title of the series, of course, is a draw. So in the Bay, you encountered whales in the Bay mating, and it was the difference of light from when you were in New York, working in this completely different setting that you started to work on this series. So could you talk a little bit more about it and how that really shifted everything that you had been doing at that point?
A student of mine, a woman by the name of Violet Fields, and I went missing in a way. I just had it with the Art Institute. I was just done. And so I said, Violet, let's get out of here. I skipped a class that I had that afternoon. And she and I drove out to one of those beaches very near the city. And I was just, walking along, and I kept seeing all all this
Like the ocean
water.
spray,
Yeah,
yeah.
and it looked like diamonds or something coming back from somewhere. And I stopped and I looked and I looked, and it turned out that those were whales. They were heading north, and the huge, I guess, pods. Just, and you could just see the water being displaced. And I started thinking about that, and what a marvelous thing, to be in that water and pushing all of that water around. And I thought, wow, whales, fucking, that must be really something, displacing all of that water.
And making so much space.
Yes. And, and jumping high and, really having a good time. And then I started to read about them. And I just, it was like an experience I could never just blow off. And so I decided, I went to a place, I think it's called, it's like a big aquarium, and they had a big orca there, captured, enslaved, But I decided I would go there and try to get a closer look. And I did. And so after the show was over, and everyone pretty much had filed out, but the orca and a porpoise were left in the thing. And so this this little porpoise was just going all around, and it was just really sensual, almost dance, A dolphin trying to fuck a whale. It was like, what kind of ego is that, huh? So I just, and I never forgot it, but it was such a beautiful thing to experience. So that's really how the whales got started. It was just happenstance. It's just like that's how life is. It's like, and it offers you all of these opportunities, but you have to be in a certain place, and you have to believe in it, And then sometimes it's not accessible. It just stays back there somewhere, percolating, and waiting. And so then it can almost burst full grown into where you are at a point.
And with these paintings, your style went back towards, the expressionistic work that you were doing when you got to Columbia and were told, that's out, minimalism is in. But it also moves away from the flatness conversation that you had been engaging in for so long, because the textures are so sumptuous, the color, there's a lot going on in these paintings that are quite different than the work that you had been engaging in for an extended period.
Well, what happened with the black paintings is that I needed something else. I needed to be engaged, so that when you're working on stretcher bars and canvas, there's a kind of in and out. It's almost like breathing. And I was working either on the floor or on the walls and pulling these big black canvases up and down and always pushing and pushing and pushing and nothing coming back, just giving and giving and giving. And so after that show at the museum in 1979, I just decided I needed, and also I got this young guy who could build stretcher bars. So for a grade, sure, here, you build stretcher bars and you don't have to worry about your grade. That was that. And so I started to move again. It started to be alive and, and talk back, And I could give it its head, and it would run and run and run and move away and move away. And then, there comes a time when everything has to be reeled in. You have to make so-called intellectual decisions about editing, what stays, what goes, and so on. So the dialogue is different. And I felt like those stripes and zips and stuff, I just opened up and grabbed the painting back. The working with liquids and that kind of thing.
You're taking control over the painting. So there's so much ground that we could cover, and we will cover a little bit more because we're almost at time. But you traveled quite extensively in the 80s and then the 90s, and you made works like Panthers in My Father's Palace when you were in Morocco traveling. There's also a whole body of work that was done while you were in Egypt called Two Deserts, Three Winters. And travel seems to be a major component, or influence at least, in the work that you're doing.
Yeah, this is the piece that...
This is at the Art Institute,
Art
on view right
Institute.
now, so go see it.
Yeah, right now. So
Yeah.
big dream come true, sorry. This piece is in the Art Institute. Yeah. Yeah.
So this came out while you were working in Morocco for an extended period.
Okay, my husband, Toro, and I, who's a fantastic painter, really one of the greats
Toro.
of our generation, and I traveled. And one of those trips was one he promised me when I first met him, that he would take me to his country. You know that old. So to Chile. But he promised that he would take me to the Atacama, the desert in the north. And eventually it did happen. We went back after the election and after Pinochet was, pushed out. And so a lot of Chilean artists in particular who had been in exile returned. And we did a show. I curated a show for the National Museum of African Americans and Latin Americans living in the U.S. And it was a big, like, I think 150,000 people saw this show, maybe more. But I went to the desert and I just fell in love. And there's the Valley of the Death. And it's, one of those dry, it's a hard desert. It's a very, in my way of thinking, kind of masculine, it's rugged. And the guide we had was wonderful because he took me in and he said, I want you to be very, very quiet and just sit down and listen. This place is not dead at all. And then you sit there quietly and you see all of these little things, kicking up dust as they move about and carry their children. And so it's a wonderful thing. And right after that, we went to Egypt. I was on sabbatical. And there is the Sahara. Actually, we were in Morocco and in Egypt. And it's a very different desert. It's softer. It's the dunes, and sandstorms and that kind of thing. So the work changed, and the work I'm doing now has changed, mostly in relation to my disabilities. I have now realized that I am not still in graduate school. I'm an old woman, 80 years old. And my body whispers to me every night, no, you're not in graduate school. You're an old lady. And, it's like everything aches and, So that title, Two Deserts, Three Winters, talks about the straddling of those two deserts within weeks, literally, apart, within weeks of being in one place and in the other.
It's almost like a nice metaphor for the ways in which you've worked over the course of your career, having a foot in one place or a different type of working, and also the various social conversations that you participated in. So I think there's...
Are we running out of time now?
We are. I know. We need like 5 hours, Mary.
Okay.
But I do want to ask you, just to fast forward to the present, about the work that you're doing now. You're based in Mexico now. And what's happening in the studio, and how did not being able to travel for a while impact the work?
I've been able to travel. We have been traveling, but it's just been kind of south, north, north, south. And my husband built a studio that is absolutely incredible for me. And so I've been working down there, and it's very different because I'm in a not only a different country, I'm in a different studio, and I walk into it, and it's virginal. And so I've had to populate it with my stuff, buying paints. Mexico has the worst paints in the world, so if you were planning to go to paint, check out Liquidex and Golden and all those other, and try to get as much stuff into the country as you can. But so I'm dealing with those paints, trying to figure out how to make them work like I want them to work. And my work is now being peopled with a different set of folks. They're horses. And so, I don't know, it's just different. Different.
It's really exciting. Just a concluding question, then we'll turn it over to a brief Q&A. But in researching you and talking with you, just the vast number of people that have been in community with you, James Baldwin, Robert Colescott, Joe Overstreet, Howardina Pindell, Toni Morrison, it's like a who's who. And it's an incredible history of people, and that you're part of that history. And these are folks that have influenced you, that you've worked with. And I'm curious, because we're in Chicago, who are some of the people that are new to you, that are influences or people that you enjoy?
I'm going to be really, really honest with you, Jamillah. I have been off the set so long, and I look through the magazines, and they send you stuff and I'm really fascinated because it's different, and I don't feel much a part of it. I see these young artists, especially black artists, that are just going through the sky. And I think that's good. And I want to encourage them. But it's like, it's not for me. I'm still so much in my own head. I've got, it would be very hard for me to be, as you say, influenced.
Yep.
I hope I am an influence.
You are. Certainly an influence.
I hope that. But I feel like a proud parent. And your parents don't always understand what you're doing. My mother used to say, well, you were a better artist before you went to art school, Because,
I've heard this before.
Right. I used to make my own paper dolls, and, I would draw the dresses. And in those days, every family almost had a seamstress within it or in the neighborhood, and they would make your prom dress and your Sunday dress and your this, that, and the other. And so, is it this? I don't know what I'm.
It's
okay.
Working. It's fine.
So, I'm just, happy to see that these young people, and they're smart, and they're not going to be taken advantage of, and they are not in stables, and they are not enslaved, and they have to know that, because I know it.
Thank you, Mary. So we have time for 2 questions before the wrap of the program. Jamie in the back can run the mic to you if you put your hand up. Anyone? There's a gentleman in the back right here.
Mary, your father flunked me in music at Toulouse College.
He's in the back.
Your father, Pops Lovelace, flunked me in music at Toulouse College before Stokely. So I don't know if he met Fannie Lou Hamer or not, but I think what's missing, from me, from my vantage point, you should show more Fannie Lou Hamer in your blackness. How about that?
I didn't understand the question.
What was the question? Sorry. About Fannie Lou Hamer?
And I can't.
I'm just asking for more urban South blackness in our works?
Influence of the South in your work? Influence of the South in your work?
Is there?
Yeah.
I think so. Did you say, is there influence of the South in my work? Was that the question?
In Ferris Street and Jackson, Mississippi, yes. And Tooele College, yes.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that's where I'm born there, as they say. And so, I'm a product of the South. When we talk about duality, maybe there is, the kind of urban migratory pattern that I fit into as, someone coming from the South, but who had lived in the Midwest and in the Far East, so to speak, and at Howard and so on. So all of that stuff is who I am. And I'm very proud to be who I am. And I'm very proud to have made this work. And I look at the work now and I go, wow, that girl sure could paint. Because it's the truth. I understood the work more or less as I went along. But now I love it. I love what I made. I love what I experienced. I love what it took to make it. And it took all that I am. That's my life's work. And this is now that I have this microphone and I can say a few things, I want to talk to the galleries and the gallerists. You have to realize that artwork is just not a cute little phrase. That's what this shit is about. It's work. This is my life's work. And I'm not going to let it be sold off. This is what I do. This is what I did with 80 years of life. And so do not think that I'm going to give it up, because of a trend or anything like that. And there are no discounts. That's what we all have to understand. Like 480 years of discounts, I think, is enough. So that's where I'm coming from. That's where Mary Lovelace O'Neal is coming from. And I thank you.
I think that is a perfect place to end.
Before I get in any more trouble.
Mary, I adore you. Thank
And I
you
adore
for
you,
being in
Jamillah.
conversation with us today.
May I say one more thing?
Of course.
I don't understand this group. They know more than I can ever know. But I am so proud of you. And I'm so proud of all of you who have fought for these positions that you deserve. You own them. You get in there and you say who you are, and you keep saying it till people understand that. I'm so proud of you.
You heard it.
Okay.
So with that, thank you, Mary, for everything you've done. Congratulations. And thank you to Expo for hosting this talk and having us in conversation.
And there are people I cannot go without having them stand. Ms. Karen Jenkins Johnson and my husband, Mr. Toro over there.
Right there being shy.
And all of these, so many of these people, gathered around are my relatives, who turned out that, they hate me, but they came because I have a piece of the Art Institute, so woo. Okay, I'm done.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone, for coming to this talk. Thank you, Mary Lovelace O'Neal. Thank you, Kate, Tony, Jamie, everyone at Expo. Enjoy your time at the fair, folks. Thank you.